Well, welcome back again to topic 14. We're still learning about the reformers in the antebellum era. Today, I'm going to be going over slides 7 through 9, and the discussion question for today's lesson is what is the difference in the beginning words of the Declaration of Sentiments and the Declaration of Independence? What was the significance of this difference and to who? Be thinking about this question as you listen today. All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk about the Underground Railroad. Now, y'all, don't get it twisted. It was not an actual railroad with trains and tracks. It was a secret network of people, both black and white, who were determined to help enslaved people escape to freedom in the North or even as far as Canada. These brave individuals were known as abolitionists because they wanted to abolish or end slavery. Here's how it worked. Conductors guided runaways from one safe spot to another. These safe spots were called stations, but they weren't like train stations. They were usually the homes of abolitionists, but they could also be churches or even hidden caves. Conductors were super clever and they hid runaways under hay in wagons or in secret compartments called false bottoms. One of the most fearless conductors was Harriet Tubman. She was a woman who had escaped slavery herself, but she didn't just stop there. She went back to the South 19 times to lead over 300 people, including her own parents, to freedom. Talk about courage. Girlfriend had it going on. Because of her incredible bravery and leadership, people started calling her the Black Moses, comparing her to Moses from the Bible, who led his people out of slavery in Egypt. She was so effective that slave owners offered a $40,000 reward for her capture, which was a huge amount of money back then. Now, that $40,000 in 1850 is equivalent to about $1.6 million today. And to be exact, it's $1,618,487 today. That's a lot of moolah. But Harriet wasn't the only hero. Underground Railroad was filled with people risking their lives to fight for freedom and justice. They used secret codes like songs and symbols to communicate without getting caught. And it wasn't just adults who were involved. Sometimes kids played a role too by carrying messages or helping to distract those who were searching for runaway slaves. By the mid 1800s, slavery was mostly in the South, but not everyone in the North was on board with ending it. Why not, you ask? Well, Northern mill owners, bankers, and merchants made a lot of money from Southern cotton, which was picked by enslaved people. They were afraid that if slavery ended, their businesses would suffer. A lot of Northern workers were also against abolition because they worried that free black people might come north and take their jobs by working for a lower pay. So it wasn't just about right and wrong, people were also thinking about their wallets. Now, in the South, most white people were furious about the growing abolitionist movement. They accused abolitionists of encouraging violence and feared that their whole way of life was under attack. Slave owners tried to justify slavery by claiming that enslaved people were better off than northern factory workers who also had tough lives. Now, while it was true that northern factory workers had very tough lives, the difference was not only did they receive pay, meaning the northern workers, not only did they receive pay for their work, albeit it was very little, but they could walk away and leave the factory if they wanted to, whereas those who were enslaved could not leave. Southerners also argued that enslaved people were cared for and loved by their masters, a claim that totally ignored the harsh reality of being owned and treated as property. Even Southerners who didn't own slaves defended the system because they believed it was essential to the Southern economy. They were convinced that Northerners were out to destroy their way of life, which only made the North and South drift further apart. All right, let's shift gears and talk about women's rights. Two sisters, Sarah and Angelina Grimke, were powerful speakers against slavery. Back then, it was considered shocking for women to speak in public, especially on political issues. Some ministers even refused to let them speak in their churches. In one case, a minister introduced them and then walked out saying he'd rather rob a chicken coop than listen to a woman speak in public. Imagine how frustrating and irritating that must have been. I'm irritated just listening him saying that, and that was almost 200 years ago. So, but the Grimke sisters didn't back down. In fact, this pushback made them even more determined. They realized that to fight for abolition, they also had to fight for women's rights. Angelina pointed out that women could do so much more to help end slavery if they weren't held back by the limits placed on them because of their gender. Oh, hold on, I lost my place. This brings us to the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, held in Seneca Falls, New York. This was the first women's rights convention in American history. About 200 women and 40 men attended. They wrote a declaration of sentiments that was inspired by the Declaration of Independence, boldly stating, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." They demanded equal rights for women at work, in schools, and in churches. But the most controversial demand was the right to vote. Even in that room of bold reformers, people still hesitated. It barely passed, but it did, and that was the start of the women's rights movement in America. Now, here are just a few of the leaders of the women's rights movement that you're going to be learning about. One is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was a trailblazer who believed girls should be able to play and be active just like boys. She thought women should be able to support themselves and have careers. Then there was Lucretia Mott. She was a Quaker and mother of 5. She was quiet but powerful organizer who led petition drives across the North. Then there was Susan B. Anthony. You guys all heard about her. She grew up in a Quaker family that believed in equality, and she started collecting anti-slavery petitions when she was just 17. She became one of the most well-known leaders for women's rights. And last but definitely not least was Sojourner Truth. She was an African American abolitionist who escaped slavery and became a powerful voice for both abolition and women's rights. Let's talk about Sojourner Truth. She was one of the most influential voices in both the abolitionist and women's rights movement. She was born Isabella Baumfree in 1797 in New York. She was one of 13 children who didn't get to grow up with her siblings because they were all sold away. She was enslaved by Dutch settlers, so she only spoke Dutch until she was 11 years old. Even when she learned English, she spoke it with a Dutch accent her entire life. After New York passed an anti-slavery law in 1827, she gained her freedom. She changed her name to Sojourner Truth in 1843 because she believed her mission was to sojourn, which means travel, and spread the truth about slavery and women's rights. She became known for her powerful speeches that challenged both racism and sexism. She was also known for her quick wit and had a talent for turning hecklers into supporters. In 1851, at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, she gave her most famous speech called Ain't I a Woman? In this speech, she challenged the idea that women were weak and needed protection, pointing out that she had worked just as hard as any man while enslaved. She also demanded that the right to vote should be for all women, not just white women. Even though she never learned to read or write, she was one of the most influential speakers of her time. Her words were so powerful that they were recorded by others, and she inspired countless people to fight for freedom and equality. Sojourner Truth continued to fight for justice until she passed away in 1883. She left behind a legacy of courage, strength, and perseverance that continues to inspire people today. Well, that wraps up the reformers and the movements that we are discussing today. Let us know if you have any questions. On the next and final episode of The Reforming Spirit in the Antebellum Era, we will be learning about art, literature, and transcendentalists. I know that's a mouthful. In the Reforming era. Remember, the past shaped today, but you shape tomorrow. Make it count. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.